Hello, welcome to my floor in Berlin. If you haven't seen, I moved to Berlin. That is why things look different. Because I did not bring my old background with me. Because you can only put 50 pounds in your suitcase. So today we are talking about Minerva once more, but I thought I would give some advice to people who might be applying to Minerva, since it's time for college applications to be happening, and I've been getting some questions about it. So I've been getting some logistical questions, which go to Minerva's website. But some basic stuff is to apply to Minerva, you can be anyone from anywhere, as long as you have a high school degree or the equivalent from your country, or you're going to be done with your high school degree before the semester starts next September. And the expected cost is also on Minerva's website, but they do give financial aid, so don't just look at the cost and say, oh, that's impossible. Apply for financial aid, see what happens. But also, something Minerva does not include in its expected cost is flights and visa application fees. So flights can cost you easily $1,000 per semester, depending on where you're going in your winter break, depending on where you're coming from, blah, blah, blah. It averages out to be pretty expensive. Also, visa application fees. If you're from outside the US, applying for an F1 visa, I think can cost $300 easily. And then every other country we go to averages out to about $100 per visa application. So it's not cheap. And that's not included in the expected costs. So when you're looking at your financial aid, also consider how you're going to have to deal with those. Some people do use their work-study money to cover those costs, which is dope, but more difficult from a budgeting perspective. Also, you do not need test scores to apply to Minerva. I'm not 100% sure, I guess I'll check when I edit, but I don't think you even need the TOEFL, because Minerva's challenges help them evaluate whether you can speak English, and you definitely don't need SAT, ACT, anything like that. I also got asked about how your high school grades affect admission, and this is a good place to talk about Minerva's overall application evaluation approach. So Minerva looks at your application holistically, which means you don't have to just hit minimums across all of these things. They look at you as a whole picture, and within that, they have basically a line you have to meet for your general excellence as a student and as a person, but there's not a definitive line for how good your grades need to be, because they'll consider
if your grades are a little lower, but you started a business that's been doing really great, and maybe you were putting a lot of time into that instead of your grades.
They'll consider that not as you slacking on academics necessarily. You should be getting good grades, but I won't tell you exactly how good those grades need to be. But you can't be failing classes left and right and get into Minerva, I think is a pretty safe thing to say. So then, within your application, what makes up the rest of this holistic picture of you is not the Common App, a list of extracurriculars and an essay. It is the challenges and the accomplishments. So, the challenges are probably what's most confusing, unknown to people who are applying to Minerva, because it is so different from what other colleges do. The way to think about this is it's basically Minerva doesn't ask for SAT scores because they don't believe that those metrics best reflect ability, so they came up with these challenges to measure their own metrics of creative thinking, critical thinking, all that stuff, to see whether they think you would do well in Minerva classes. So, the challenges, in a way that is very unlike the SAT, cannot really be studied for. They just can't. It's much more basic skills that you should have, and it's much more skills than knowledge, which is why you can't really study for it very well. There's going to be some math, there's going to be some writing, there's going to be some other stuff. And I think my main tips for the challenges is to think about being in a place where you can really concentrate, where you're not tired and exhausted, but very mentally present. And also the space is not giving you too many distractions, so when you sit down to do it, it should be fairly quiet. You should be able to focus easily because they are timed. So if something interrupts you in the middle of one of the challenges, that can be a problem. I also personally recommend doing them all at once. I know you can spread it out, you can do them one at a time. I just think it is difficult to be in a good place, in that good state of mind, 6 times for 20 minutes each, as opposed to just finding a 2-hour block and being in that perfect environment for those 2 hours. So that's what I recommend. Also, and this applies to challenges and accomplishments, I recommend thinking beforehand about what you know Minerva is looking for, which is what kind of people they're looking for, and then thinking about how you think you match up with those characteristics. So for example, I think they talk about like curious and perseverant and a leader, kind of like things that they're looking for in students. So think about what those mean to you, how you think you fit those, and take that mindset, knowledge on the back burner into the challenges, especially for like the interview session. I believe there is still an interview section that's like automated, but the application has honestly changed a lot since I took it, so I can't say for sure, but having that sort of thing in your mind when approaching the challenges can help you understand what they want you to be showing them, basically. And then for the accomplishments, that is even more relevant, because you should be thinking about anything you've accomplished, obviously, but especially thinking about what it is that makes you proud and how that might line up with some of these things Minerva wants in its students. You can really explicitly tell them who you are and why you are a Minerva student in your accomplishments. I'm going to give a few examples of what my accomplishments were, but obviously you can't copy my accomplishments. You shouldn't assume that these are the only thing that you can put on accomplishments. They're very, very different for different people, but just to kind of help you stretch beyond what you traditionally might think of as an accomplishment. So something more traditional I put down was winning a couple photography competitions and qualifying to go to a national cheerleading competition, because those are like pretty standard things that you would consider like an accomplishment. Something that was a little bit different was just making the highest level cheer team. I'm not assuming you know anything about competitive cheerleading, but basically there are 5 levels. 5 is the highest. I competed level 3, and then I got injured. I went down to level 2, but the next year I made level 5, which is the very best. And I was really proud of myself for that, even though I hadn't really like won anything to do that. It was just like overcoming my own like mental challenges to do with the injury mostly. So that's like a little bit different, something you wouldn't really be able to put in your extracurriculars or awards section on like the Common App, but something that Minerva would be interested in hearing about. And then another thing I put down that was much more unconventional, I guess, was that I was proud to have organized a Thanksgiving potluck for some students at my high school. So basically, I was in the IB program. If you don't know anything about it, it's like a magnet program for nerds that was in a public high school, but it was only like part of the public high school. So it was like a smaller set of the whole high school. But because it was smaller, we tended to all know each other. We had all of our classes together. There was like a set of teachers that was involved. So it was kind of more of a community. And so there had been this tradition of this class, like year, that always organized a Thanksgiving potluck, but they graduated when I was a sophomore. And so in my junior year, everyone was talking about how they wanted this tradition to continue, but nobody was really sure or like taking charge of it. So I decided that I was going to lead it and make sure it happened, which was very easy. I basically just like created a sign-up list and put it in a central place and talked to people about it so that they would know what was happening. And we had a lot of people bring food. I think 30 or 40 people ate the food. So most of those, like 30, brought some sort of food. And then we had a few leeches. That was a really great turnout, especially considering we did it in one classroom, and I was really proud to have carried on the tradition. So that's like something that doesn't really count as like an extracurricular or anything really, but it was something that I was proud of because I had gone a little bit outside my comfort zone and been pretty successful. So like think of stuff like that where you were proud of yourself, but it's not something that you got a medal for or even a certificate or anything like that. Another thing to keep in mind is the evidence for your accomplishments. Like totally awards, certificates and stuff can work, but for the potluck, I had a picture of the potluck and that was good enough. And I also, for the making the level 5 team, I just like screenshotted the email I got telling me which team I was on, and you can do some slightly more creative stuff like that when it comes to evidence, but also definitely if you're just putting down like an advisor, talk to the person to tell them that you're doing that. Also, if there's something in your life that you have spent just a ton of time on that you think you're really good at because you've worked really hard at it, definitely try to reflect that in your accomplishments, because that's something Minerva likes to see. So for me, that was the cheer. I used, I think, 2 accomplishments to talk about cheer and how important it was to me and how much I had worked at it and how I had really gotten good at it. And I also talked about photography, which is another thing that I thought I was pretty good at because I had been doing it a lot, and particularly outside of the classroom. Yeah, so basically Minerva is looking for cool people. So when you're doing the application, just think about what makes you such a great person and then tell them about it. Good luck. Thanks for joining me on my floor today, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!